Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I was midway through my second coffee, pulling a double shift at Raven Rock Nuclear Facility when the lights flickered. At first, nobody reacted. Flickers were rare but not impossible here. Raven Rock was built in the 50s, hardened to withstand nuclear war, terrorist attacks, and everything else you could throw at it. A little power surge, nothing unusual. But this flicker was different. It didn't pass immediately. The hum of computers rose sharply, monitors stuttered, then everything snapped dark before the emergency lighting kicked in. Dim strips of orange along the baseboards and the faint glow from backup screens gave the operations center an eerie half-light. Backup generator will kick on, Marcus reassured us from the monitoring desk. Marcus Reed, senior reactor operator, had been here nearly 20 years. His calm voice was usually enough to settle nerves. Tonight, though, the unease lingered. Should have already, I said, looking toward the observation window. Outside, beyond reinforced glass, the cooling towers loomed silent against the night sky. Even in a crisis, the plume of steam usually rose calmly, evidence the facility was functioning safely. Tonight, nothing but quiet darkness. I moved to my station, checked the readouts. Red warning lights blinked ominously on the console. Coolant flow disrupted. Reactor temperature climbing. Backup pumps were failing to engage. I ran diagnostics, but the screens froze mid-process. I tapped keys faster, frustration growing. This wasn't just a typical glitch. "Anyone have comms with control?" Marcus asked. "No," said Angela, one of our newest techs. "Internal lines are down. External calls aren't connecting either." The silence that followed was brief. Angela reached for her personal cell phone, frowning. "Cell reception's down too." Marcus sighed deeply, checked his watch, then motioned to me. "Ryan, let's check the auxiliary generators manually. We need to get coolant flowing again before things get worse." Marcus and I moved quickly down the dim hallway toward the mechanical room. Every step echoed uncomfortably loud. The hallways here were built for war, thick concrete and steel. Sound bounced off these walls, amplifying even the smallest movement. Under normal circumstances, I barely noticed. Tonight, each echo felt oddly threatening. As we passed through the reinforced security doors leading toward the auxiliary systems, something unusual caught my eye. An access panel on the wall hung slightly open. Someone had tampered with the breakers inside. Marcus saw it too and muttered quietly, "This isn't right. Security protocols prohibit manual shutdown." Before I could respond, a noise resonated from down the hall, a deep, guttural sound followed by shuffling steps. Marcus halted instantly, his flashlight beam frozen in place. The shuffling grew louder, accompanied by an unnatural dragging, as if someone were injured, struggling forward. "Who's there?" Marcus called, his voice carefully controlled, authoritative yet wary. No reply, just steady, dragging, and raspy breathing. Marcus raised his flashlight, its beam trembling slightly, cutting through the dim emergency lighting until it landed on a figure emerging from around the corner. The silhouette of a person appeared, lurching slowly. Arms hung loosely, head tilted unnaturally to one side. I recognized him immediately. Jack Harper, security guard from night shift. He wore his dark blue uniform, but it was torn and stained darkly around his shoulder. Blood seeped slowly down one sleeve, pooling around his wrist. His eyes were wide but unfocused, glassy and empty. "Jack, what happened?" Marcus said cautiously, moving a half-step closer. Jack didn't reply, just staggered toward us, slow but relentless. Marcus hesitated briefly, eyes narrowing as he studied Jack's condition. Something was seriously wrong. This wasn't a simple injury. Instinctively, Marcus took a step back, raising a hand defensively. "Jack, stop. Stay right there. Tell me what happened." Jack lunged suddenly, his movements slow but frighteningly determined. Marcus reacted instantly, pushing me backward out of Jack's reach. Jack's teeth snapped shut, inches from Marcus's face. A savage, animalistic gesture. Marcus shoved him away, harder this time. Jack staggered slightly, then lurched forward again, unfazed. "Back off, Jack." Jack didn't respond. He kept coming, driven by some primal, unstoppable force. Marcus glanced around quickly, grabbing a steel wrench from a maintenance toolbox nearby. His eyes met mine, silently communicating the urgency. I nodded, grabbing a heavy-duty flashlight from my belt. Jack lunged again. Marcus swung hard, connecting solidly with Jack's temple. The crack was sickeningly loud. Jack stumbled sideways, his head snapping grotesquely. He collapsed onto the concrete floor, limbs twitching briefly before going completely still. Marcus stared at Jack's motionless body, breathing quickly. What the hell is going on here? Before we could even try to comprehend what had happened, more dragging footsteps echoed from farther down the hallway, approaching steadily. Multiple footsteps this time, accompanied by low moans, sounds no human should make. Marcus grabbed my arm firmly, urging me toward the auxiliary room. "Come on, move!" We rushed through the heavy steel door, sealing it behind us just as something slammed against it from the other side. Loud banging erupted, desperate and rhythmic. Marcus secured the manual bolt and stepped back, breathing hard. "We can't stay here. We need comms. If this is happening across the facility, we have to call outside help." I glanced around the auxiliary room, thinking quickly. The generators here were offline too, deliberately disabled. Someone had sabotaged the power systems intentionally. It didn't seem random. It felt deliberate, calculated. "We'll take the maintenance tunnels to central control," Marcus decided, motioning toward an emergency hatch on the far wall. "It's narrow, but we'll avoid main hallways. Those things, whatever Jack became, I doubt they're in the tunnels yet." We pulled open the heavy hatch, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Marcus went first, climbing quickly. I followed closely, the hatch sealing above us with a heavy clang. The tunnels below felt cramped and oppressive, barely lit by red emergency bulbs along the edges. Every sound we made echoed disturbingly, bouncing off the narrow metal walls. Marcus moved confidently, counting junctions as we passed them, familiar with the maze-like layout beneath the facility. After several tense minutes, he stopped abruptly beneath another hatch, silently gesturing upward. This hatch led directly to central control, the main communications hub for the entire facility. Marcus twisted the handle slowly, carefully opening the hatch. Dim emergency lights spilled down from above. We climbed silently out into the control room, scanning quickly for any movement. The room was eerily silent, screens flickering sporadically, equipment scattered. A dark stain streaked across the console near the main emergency phone line. "Secure the door," Marcus instructed quietly, moving swiftly toward the emergency phone. I locked the hatch, sealing the tunnel behind us, then approached Marcus. He held the receiver tightly, frustration evident in his face. "Line's dead," he said bitterly. "Something cut all communications." The radio crackled suddenly, startling us both. A distorted voice broke through static. "Facility compromised. Multiple infected. Evacuate immediately. Repeat. Raven Rock compromised. Containment breached. Evacuate immediately." Marcus dropped the receiver, eyes widening as the radio continued repeating its grim warning. We stared at each other silently, processing the truth we'd both feared. This wasn't just sabotage or equipment failure. This was deliberate, deadly, and spreading. And now Marcus and I were trapped inside Raven Rock nuclear facility, with no communication, no power, and something monstrous spreading in every corridor. Marcus paced briefly, his boots crunching broken glass across the floor. He stared at the emergency radio as the grim warning repeated itself on an endless loop. Each repetition underscored the severity of our situation, making the silence afterward even heavier. His eyes shifted to me, a calculated clarity overcoming the initial shock. "We can't wait here," Marcus said firmly, stepping forward to deactivate the looping message. The room plunged back into a dense, oppressive silence. "Communications are cut, powers sabotaged, and those things are probably spreading throughout the facility. If the containment's breached like the broadcast said, then the surface could be just as bad. We have to move, find other survivors if possible, and secure a way out." I nodded slowly, glancing around the empty control room, trying to ignore the dark stains splattered across keyboards and shattered monitors. The blood was fresh, evidence of a struggle that had occurred here minutes before we arrived. Whoever had been here last hadn't left willingly, or perhaps hadn't left at all. Marcus approached a large wall-mounted cabinet, unlocking it with a key from his belt. He swung the steel doors open to reveal emergency equipment, flashlights, batteries, medical kits, gas masks, and 2 radios designed specifically for short-range communication within Raven Rock. Marcus handed one radio to me, tested them briefly, and then checked the batteries in each flashlight. "Take whatever else you need," Marcus advised, slinging an emergency backpack over his shoulder. I grabbed a similar bag and stuffed it with medical supplies and extra batteries. He turned toward the facility blueprint pinned on the wall, tracing paths with his finger. "We should try to reach the administrative sector first. If security is holding anywhere, it'll be there." He folded the blueprint roughly, shoving it into a side pocket of his gear. We moved to the reinforced exit door, peering cautiously into the corridor beyond through a small observation window. The emergency lighting had dimmed further, casting only faint outlines across the corridor's metal and concrete walls. The hallway seemed empty, still and deceptively quiet, but we knew better than to trust the silence now. Marcus unlocked the door carefully and swung it open, the heavy hinges creaking despite careful handling. We stepped out, flashlights cutting sharp beams of white through the darkness. Every shadow felt alive now, every sound amplified by anticipation. The corridor stretched ahead, lined by steel doors, utility panels, and ventilation ducts. The smell of smoke and chemical disinfectant lingered, blending unpleasantly with an underlying metallic odor, one we both recognized immediately. We advanced cautiously, footsteps echoing softly. Marcus kept his flashlight beam steady, carefully sweeping it across every doorway and alcove. Our breathing remained deliberately slow, controlled by experience rather than conscious effort. Years of training for reactor emergencies had sharpened our instincts, but nothing prepared us for what we saw next. A heavy metal door to one of the laboratory wings hung partially open, bent outward by some tremendous force. Marcus paused, signaling me to wait. He approached silently, flashlight focused steadily ahead. Peering carefully through the damaged doorframe, he froze momentarily, posture rigid. I approached quietly behind him and followed his line of sight. The lab beyond was a mess of overturned tables, shattered glassware, and broken instruments. Papers were scattered across the floor, spattered with dark stains. Near the center of the room, slumped awkwardly against an overturned filing cabinet, lay the remains of Dr. Helen Briggs, the facility's head microbiologist. Her white lab coat was stained heavily, and beneath it, her injuries were unmistakably severe. She had been attacked brutally, her face frozen in an expression that spoke clearly of disbelief rather than pain. Nearby, broken vials littered the ground, their labels blurred but still partially legible. They were marked clearly as biohazards, samples stored securely for emergency research. Now they lay broken, contents leaked and mixed upon the cold floor. Marcus stepped back, visibly shaken but resolute. Whatever started this, it began here. Someone intentionally opened containment. Before either of us could speak further, a soft dragging noise drifted from deeper inside the lab. Marcus swiftly motioned for me to extinguish my flashlight, plunging us into near total darkness. We stood absolutely still, waiting. The dragging continued, slow and steady, accompanied by the same terrible moaning we'd heard before. A figure moved into view, illuminated weakly by distant emergency lights inside the lab. A scientist wearing torn protective gear stumbled forward. His head hung limply to one side, arms dangling awkwardly as he moved. Like Jack Harper earlier, this man was clearly no longer living, but he wasn't truly dead either. His movements were aimless, driven by a relentless instinct. He brushed past the tables, tripping clumsily over scattered chairs and equipment, but never slowing, never stopping. Marcus signaled urgently toward a side corridor. We moved quickly, silently, leaving the undead scientist behind. Our path twisted through narrower maintenance halls, avoiding main areas whenever possible. Marcus led confidently, each junction navigated swiftly. Gradually the corridors became narrower, rougher, built for utility rather than personnel. Pipes and cables lined the walls, making our progress more difficult but safer from the horrors behind us. After several tense minutes, we emerged into a wider hallway, an older section of Raven Rock built originally during the Cold War. Walls here were lined with faded military signage. The hallway eventually widened, and ahead lay a larger security checkpoint, doors firmly shut, security cameras hanging silent. Approaching carefully, Marcus tested the keypad, entering a security override code. The doors hesitated briefly, then slid open grudgingly, revealing the administration wing beyond. The reception area was abandoned, empty desks illuminated by flickering emergency lighting. Phones lay off hook, chairs overturned, A low electronic hum still resonated through the room, indicating partial power still reached here from backup batteries. Marcus quickly moved behind the reception desk, checking the monitors, scanning through security camera feeds. Most screens displayed static, but 2 images remained clear. One showed the main entrance gate outside, swarmed by slow-moving infected figures shuffling aimlessly in the shadows. Another displayed a horrifying view inside the reactor cooling control center, technicians slumped motionless at their stations, while infected figures wandered among the equipment. The reality sank in harshly. Raven Rock had fallen completely. Marcus stepped back from the monitors, jaw set firmly. "We can't get out through the main gate. The entire surface perimeter is compromised. We have to find another way." He scanned the area quickly, stopping at a large emergency evacuation schematic mounted to a nearby wall. He traced paths rapidly, mentally weighing options. "There's a secondary service tunnel beneath Sector 5. It's a maintenance route, old but still usable. If we can reach it, it should lead us to a small, secure maintenance outpost. We might find working communication equipment, or at least a way outside that's not compromised yet." He looked back at me, determination overshadowing fatigue. "It's risky, but it's the only option left." I nodded grimly. "Then let's move." Marcus gathered himself and took the lead again, guiding us toward the elevators at the far side of the administration wing. As we reached them, however, we found them powered down, locked shut, automatically by emergency protocols. Without hesitation, Marcus turned sharply toward a stairwell, its heavy steel door slightly ajar. He swung it wide, revealing stairs descending sharply into further darkness. As we descended, our flashlights barely penetrated the gloom below. Every step brought colder, damp air, heavy with mustiness and rust. The silence here was almost total, broken only by our cautious footsteps. The lower we went, the more oppressive it became, the quiet swallowing every trace of the facility above. At the bottom, we stood in front of a massive door labeled Sector 5 Maintenance Access Only. Marcus placed his hand on the cold metal handle, hesitating briefly. Both of us knew whatever lay beyond could be worse than what we'd already seen. With a heavy breath, Marcus twisted the handle sharply, pushed the door open, and stepped into the unknown, flashlight illuminating a narrow concrete tunnel stretching endlessly forward, our only chance of survival buried deep beneath Raven Rock Nuclear Facility. The tunnel stretched ahead, lit intermittently by flickering bulbs encased in wire mesh, spaced every 50 feet or so. Their weak, amber glow cast strange, jittery shadows across the damp concrete walls, turning every corner into a silent threat. Marcus walked ahead steadily, his pace deliberate but cautious. Neither of us spoke as we moved deeper beneath the facility, focusing instead on each echoing footfall and the muffled dripping of unseen water sources. The air grew colder and heavier, and every step made it clearer we had left behind any sense of normalcy. After several minutes, the tunnel widened slightly into a junction chamber where thick metal pipes, coated in rust, branched off to different sections. Marcus paused briefly, shining his flashlight toward a faded sign bolted to the wall, its lettering worn and barely legible. He traced his finger along the map he'd retrieved earlier, confirming our route silently. I glanced nervously back the way we'd come, half expecting movement, but the darkness remained still. Marcus motioned forward, and we resumed our journey, veering right towards Sector 5's secondary maintenance outpost. The tunnel gradually narrowed again, its walls pressing in tighter, heavy and oppressive. The stale scent of mold mixed uneasily with traces of diesel fuel and machine oil, odors common beneath industrial complexes but unsettling under current circumstances. Suddenly, Marcus raised his hand sharply, halting in his tracks. He crouched lower, pointing toward a maintenance alcove ahead. My breath paused momentarily when my flashlight illuminated 2 slumped figures leaning against a wall, partially hidden behind old storage crates. Marcus approached cautiously, illuminating the scene more clearly. 2 maintenance workers dressed in dirty coveralls lay motionless. It was immediately clear they had met their end violently, each bearing deep wounds on their necks and arms. Despite the severity of their injuries, the damage wasn't enough to obscure their faces completely. I recognized them immediately, Carl Bennett and Luis Rivera. They had been friendly faces around the facility, usually cheerful despite the monotonous labor. Seeing them now, silent and still, brought a stark clarity to our situation. Raven Rock was truly gone, no matter how much I wanted to believe otherwise. Marcus stood slowly, pulling me away from the bodies with a gentle urgency. "Let's keep moving," he said, voice low and grim. His flashlight lingered momentarily, then he moved onward, pushing us forward. The tunnel continued ahead, seemingly endless, our footsteps becoming rhythmic and automatic. Soon the passageway sloped downward, deeper underground. My ears popped slightly with the increasing pressure. Marcus noticed my discomfort and offered a brief nod of reassurance, though his expression remained guarded. I knew he was feeling the same uncertainty, the same simmering dread. We continued descending until the tunnel abruptly ended at a massive metal door, its faded paint flaking around its edges. Stenciled across the door in bold authoritative letters were the words, "Maintenance Outpost, Sector 5. Marcus approached cautiously, pressing his hand against the door's surface. It was unlocked, the latch mechanism already broken, evidence someone had forced entry before us. Marcus carefully pulled it open, revealing a room beyond, illuminated by weak emergency lighting. The outpost was small and cluttered, filled with racks of spare equipment, dusty crates, and various tools. In one corner stood an old communications panel, its screens dark and inactive. We stepped inside cautiously, flashlights sweeping the room. Aside from our own careful footsteps, the silence here was deafening. Marcus immediately moved toward the communications equipment, checking switches and cables, his hands working methodically. I watched the door nervously, flashlight occasionally flicking back to the dark corridor behind us. The quiet amplified every small sound, the creak of Marcus adjusting equipment, the faint hum of backup batteries powering emergency lights, the slow drip of moisture echoing from the tunnel. The lack of activity here was unnerving, almost more troubling than discovering another scene of violence. The empty calm felt wrong, artificial. Marcus cursed softly under his breath, pulling back from the equipment panel. "Dead, completely fried," he said bitterly, shaking his head. "Looks intentional again. Someone made sure communication wouldn't leave this place." He stepped back from the panel, frustration evident in his eyes, but he quickly refocused. "We need to get topside and try to find another way to contact outside help. This outpost should have a ladder access hatch leading up to a maintenance building at surface level. We might be able to get out through there, bypassing the compromised main gates." He moved across the room, scanning the ceiling until his flashlight beam illuminated a narrow metal ladder bolted securely against the far wall, ascending into darkness. Marcus climbed first, testing each rung carefully. I followed, feeling the ladder vibrate slightly under our combined weight. The climb felt endless, the rungs cold beneath my hands, the passage narrow enough that my shoulders occasionally brushed the rough concrete walls. After a long claustrophobic ascent, Marcus reached a sealed hatch. He twisted the locking mechanism, grunting with the effort, finally forcing it open with a loud metallic squeal. Dim moonlight immediately flooded the narrow shaft, along with colder air smelling faintly of burning fuel and smoke. Marcus climbed through cautiously, then extended a hand to help me through. We emerged into a maintenance garage, small, cluttered, and littered with abandoned equipment. The door to the outside stood ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. We approached cautiously, stepping outside for the first time since the nightmare began. The night sky was overcast, tinted orange by distant fires burning near Waynesboro. The sight was surreal and horrifying. From here, we could see the full extent of Raven Rock's collapse. Beyond the perimeter fences, numerous small fires dotted the landscape. Vehicles lay overturned or abandoned, and slow-moving figures shuffled silently across roads and fields. The world beyond Raven Rock was no safer than the nightmare we'd left underground. Marcus moved carefully, staying close to the shadows of nearby buildings. I followed closely, glancing around nervously. Every noise carried further now. A distant scream echoed briefly, followed by silence. He led us toward a small vehicle lot reserved for facility trucks and maintenance vans. Several vehicles remained parked, doors open, interiors empty and stained darkly. We approached a nearby maintenance pickup truck cautiously, peering inside before motioning me over. Keys still inside, sliding quickly into the driver's seat. He tested the ignition, and the engine sputtered briefly before roaring to life. I quickly climbed into the passenger seat, locking my door instinctively. Marcus shifted into gear, pulling carefully out onto the narrow access road leading away from Raven Rock. The headlights cast pale beams into the darkness, illuminating scattered debris and abandoned vehicles lining the route. We drove slowly at first, weaving carefully around obstacles. As we reached the main access road, the devastation became clearer. Burned-out vehicles and torn fencing marked a path of panic and destruction. Figures moved along the roadside, shambling slowly, drawn toward the sound of our engine. Marcus increased speed, maneuvering expertly past groups of infected, their arms reaching weakly toward our vehicle as we passed. Neither of us spoke immediately, the reality outside the facility sinking in. This wasn't just Raven Rock. It was everywhere. Whatever began in the labs beneath us had spread rapidly, consuming everything in its path. The road ahead stretched uncertainly toward Waynesboro, a small town once familiar and ordinary, now unrecognizable beneath smoke, ruin, and the roaming undead. Marcus gripped the wheel firmly, eyes narrowed, focusing on the road ahead. We can't stop. Whatever this is, it's spreading fast. We need to find help and warn them. I nodded silently, my gaze fixed out the window at the destruction passing by in blurred images. Raven Rock was behind us, but the nightmare was far from over. We were escaping into a world equally compromised, equally uncertain. The road ahead was long, dangerous, and our chances were uncertain at best. Yet we drove onward, because there was no other choice. We drove steadily through the night, the pickup truck's headlights slicing through swirling smoke and dust, occasionally illuminating groups of infected standing aimlessly on the roadside. Marcus carefully swerved around overturned vehicles and scattered debris, rarely slowing down enough to give those figures a chance to approach us. The scenes outside the window became surreal in the pale glow of our lights, abandoned houses, burned fields, deserted gas stations, all proof that civilization was disintegrating rapidly. 20 minutes out from Raven Rock, we approached Waynesboro's outskirts, hoping to find survivors or at least functional communications. The small town had always been quiet, the kind of place you'd drive through without noticing if you weren't looking for it. Tonight, it was impossible to overlook. A police barricade, now abandoned, blocked half the main road into town. Patrol cars with shattered windows and torn doors sat eerily still beneath flickering streetlights. The silence around them was absolute, unsettlingly unnatural for a town usually bustling with activity, even late at night. Marcus slowed the truck, glancing around the barricade, scanning for movement. When nothing emerged from the shadows, he navigated around the patrol cars, the engine's rumble feeling intrusive against the silence. The deeper we ventured into Waynesboro, the worse the devastation became. Storefront windows lay shattered, shelves inside picked clean. Cars were left abandoned at intersections, doors open as if their occupants had suddenly vanished. Papers fluttered across empty sidewalks, caught by stray gusts of wind, adding to the sense of abandonment. We moved steadily forward, keeping an eye out for any signs of life. Our plan was simple but urgent: find an active police or fire station, hospital, or even a working phone line. Anything to alert someone outside this area about the disaster spreading from Raven Rock. As we turned onto Main Street, a faint, rhythmic banging echoed down an alleyway to our right. Marcus slowed instinctively, shining the truck's lights into the alley, revealing 3 infected individuals mindlessly pounding against the closed metal door of a pharmacy. Marcus accelerated quickly, leaving them behind, but the image lingered, a grim reminder of how quickly humanity had collapsed here. "Keep an eye out for the fire station," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady, eyes fixed forward. "It's about 3 blocks ahead. They should have radios, possibly backup generators still working. We might find someone who knows what's happening elsewhere." I nodded silently, trying to focus through the windshield, eyes searching the darkness for any recognizable landmarks. The fire station soon appeared ahead, a large brick building with its front doors wide open. Marcus stopped the truck a cautious distance away, engine idling quietly. We sat watching for a few tense moments, scanning for any signs of movement, friendly or otherwise. The station seemed deserted, but a faint glow from inside hinted at electricity still running from backup power. Marcus finally shifted the truck into park, glancing at me solemnly. "Stay sharp. We go in quick, find radios or equipment, then get out. No delays." We exited the truck, shutting doors quietly. Marcus moved ahead, flashlight in one hand and wrench in the other, stepping swiftly toward the open bay doors. I followed closely behind, eyes sweeping nervously around the empty streets. Inside the station, we quickly discovered the place had seen violence. Equipment lockers were overturned, medical supplies strewn across the concrete floor. A fire axe lay discarded near a blood-stained jacket. Marcus crouched beside it momentarily, examining the patches on the uniform. "Lieutenant Miles," Marcus murmured. "Good man. Used to come by Raven Rock once a month to check fire safety systems. Whatever happened here happened fast." He stood swiftly, moving toward the rear of the station, toward the dispatch office. We found the door ajar, swinging gently, as if recently disturbed. Marcus pushed it open carefully, flashlight cutting through the darkened interior. Dispatch radios crackled softly with static, indicating they still had power. Marcus moved quickly, fiddling with switches, adjusting dials, trying various frequencies, desperate for a clear signal. I stood watch at the doorway, flashlight illuminating the empty garage, senses strained for any movement. After several anxious moments, Marcus finally caught a signal, a voice, faint and barely audible through the static. He adjusted knobs frantically until the voice came clearer, though still breaking occasionally. "Regional authorities advise evacuation, infection spreading rapidly, Baltimore compromised, Harrisburg unreachable, National Guard overwhelmed, residents urged to avoid major roads, seek remote shelter, CDC efforts unsuccessful so far." Marcus glanced up at me, eyes wide with disbelief. The radio continued its grim report, detailing city after city falling into chaos. It wasn't isolated, the entire region was unraveling. Our desperate hope of contacting anyone for help dissolved instantly. We stood silent for a moment, absorbing the devastating reality, when sudden movement in the bay garage snapped my attention sharply back. 3 infected shuffled slowly toward us, drawn by the faint glow of our flashlights and the noise from the radio. Marcus immediately turned down the radio's volume, but it was too late. They had already spotted us. We had no choice but to fight or flee, and the narrow hallway offered limited maneuverability. Marcus grabbed the fire axe from the garage floor, motioning for me to follow him quickly back toward the truck. He swung sharply at the nearest infected, the blade connecting solidly, sending it sprawling backward. Another reached for Marcus, jaws snapping hungrily. I lunged forward instinctively, flashlight striking the attacker hard in the skull. It staggered sideways, colliding heavily into a wall. We sprinted toward the truck, leaping inside, doors slamming as Marcus jammed the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights illuminating more infected emerging from alleys and doorways, drawn by the commotion. Marcus accelerated sharply, plowing through a small cluster ahead, their bodies tumbling away as the truck raced forward. Once clear of immediate danger, Marcus slowed slightly, his breathing steady but strained. "We can't stay here. We need to head toward more isolated areas, somewhere less populated. Maybe the state park. Michaud Forest isn't far, might be safer there. Fewer people means fewer infected." I nodded silently, staring ahead into darkness. Our path out of town was littered with wreckage, burned-out cars and overturned trucks, testament to the panic that had swept through here hours before. The outskirts of Waynesboro quickly disappeared behind us, replaced again by open road and isolated farms. We drove silently for miles, passing empty fields and occasional distant fires glowing orange against the night sky. The infected grew fewer as we distanced ourselves from population centers, replaced by eerie silence and shadows cast by trees lining the roadside. Eventually, Marcus slowed again as the entrance to Michaud State Forest appeared ahead. A wooden sign stood crookedly near the roadway, welcoming visitors to a place that, under normal circumstances, promised tranquility and recreation. Tonight, it was simply our last hope for temporary refuge. Marcus maneuvered the truck carefully onto an unpaved forest road, bumping steadily through dark woods. Trees pressed close, their branches overhead blocking the faint moonlight, casting deep shadows over the narrow dirt track. After several tense minutes, we reached a small clearing with a modest ranger station, dark and seemingly abandoned. Marcus parked the truck close to the station, extinguishing the headlights. He stepped out quietly, flashlight in hand, moving cautiously toward the small building. The door stood ajar, hinges broken. Marcus hesitated briefly before stepping inside, and I quickly followed, closing the door quietly behind us. Inside, the ranger station was empty but mostly intact, providing temporary shelter from whatever horrors lurked in the night. Marcus tested the radio here too, but static was all that remained. We secured the windows, barricaded the door with heavy furniture, and sat silently for a moment, trying to comprehend what our next move could be. Outside, distant moans occasionally echoed through the forest, reminding us we weren't truly safe, merely hiding. Morning was still hours away, and until then we could only wait silently, hoping that dawn would bring clearer answers. But deep down, we both knew the grim truth. Raven Rock had been just the beginning. The entire world outside these walls was quickly descending into darkness, and there might be nowhere left to run. The ranger station creaked softly as the forest breathed around it, the ancient timber settling with quiet groans, masking other, less comforting sounds that drifted through the darkness outside. Marcus and I sat quietly, our flashlights off, allowing our eyes to slowly adjust to the gloom. We had barricaded every window and door with heavy furniture, but it did little to ease the sense of exposure. Even inside, we felt vulnerable, trapped by thin walls and uncertainty. Sleep was impossible, our minds too filled with images from the nightmare we'd narrowly escaped. Hours passed in strained silence until pale grey light finally seeped through the cracks in the barricades. Dawn brought relief, but also clarity, revealing the stark reality of our situation. Marcus stood slowly, moving cautiously toward one of the covered windows. He carefully lifted the edge of a blanket we'd used to block out the outside world, peering through the gap. I watched him intently, ready for any sudden movement or warning. After a moment, he shook his head gently, stepping back. "There's movement out there," Marcus said quietly. "Slow, wandering, aimless. Looks like at least a dozen or so infected, but they're not aware of us yet." We both knew remaining hidden was only a temporary solution. We couldn't stay holed up forever. Supplies inside the station were limited, some canned goods, bottled water, basic first aid kits, but not enough to sustain us beyond a day or two. Without communications, we had no idea how widespread the infection had become or if any organized response still existed. The radio broadcasts had painted a bleak picture, and it was unlikely help was coming anytime soon. Marcus moved decisively, his pragmatic nature pushing him toward action. "We need a clear route out of here. There might be trail maps or information inside that desk." He motioned toward an old ranger's desk against the far wall, drawers half opened and scattered with papers. I approached quietly, pulling open each drawer carefully, searching through files and maps. Eventually, I found a detailed trail map of Misho State Forest. We spread it across the desk, tracing potential routes, considering various paths toward more isolated areas. Marcus pointed toward a smaller dirt track marked Appalachian Ridge Trail running deep into the forest. "This trail leads higher into the mountains. There's a forestry lookout station marked near the summit. Usually those places have emergency radios and signal flares, maybe even supplies. If we're lucky, it's remote enough to be free of infected." I nodded agreement. It was a gamble, but a better choice than lingering here. We quickly gathered what few supplies we could. Water bottles, first aid supplies, the map, and prepared ourselves mentally for the trek. Marcus tightened his grip on the fire axe he'd taken from the Waynesboro fire station, and I gripped the sturdy steel flashlight, ready to use it defensively if necessary. We quietly moved the furniture away from the door, Marcus slowly opening it just enough to slip outside. Morning air was cold and damp, heavy mist drifting among the trees. Outside, the forest was unsettlingly still. Marcus motioned silently, and we moved swiftly away from the ranger station, careful to keep the building between us and the infected we'd spotted earlier. Once we reached the tree line, we moved faster, following the map's route deeper into the forest. The narrow trail climbed steadily uphill, the mist clinging to us as we ascended. Our footsteps fell softly onto damp leaves, every sound magnified by the oppressive quiet. An hour into the climb, Marcus suddenly paused, raising his hand sharply. Ahead, lying sprawled across the trail, lay a fallen hiker, wearing a bright yellow jacket, now muddied and torn. The hiker was clearly deceased, his body partially concealed by brush. Marcus approached cautiously, scanning for signs of movement nearby. It appeared this hiker had fallen victim not long ago, the injuries consistent with what we'd already witnessed, deep bites on his arms and neck. Marcus frowned deeply, turning quickly to move us onward. As we continued ascending, the trail narrowed further, becoming steeper and more rugged. Marcus moved tirelessly ahead, eyes fixed intently on the path, his determination driving us both forward. Occasionally we caught distant glimpses through the thinning trees of smoke rising from far-off fires, reminders of chaos raging beyond the safety of the forest. Hours passed, marked only by the slow climb and increasing exhaustion. The lookout tower finally appeared ahead, silhouetted faintly against a grey sky. It rose tall above the tree line, a skeletal structure of metal and wood perched upon the highest ridge. The climb had been draining, but seeing our destination provided renewed energy. We approached cautiously, watching for any signs of infected or other dangers. Reaching the base of the tower, Marcus examined the area carefully. A small maintenance cabin stood nearby, windows intact and doors securely locked, though clearly abandoned. Marcus peered inside through dusty windows before testing the door handle, eventually forcing it open with a sturdy kick. Inside, the cabin was empty, except for shelves stocked modestly with canned food, bottled water, batteries, and some emergency supplies. Marcus quickly checked a small radio unit bolted to the desk, but found it powerless and inoperative. We were relieved to find basic survival equipment, but disappointed at the continued absence of communication with the outside world. Determined to signal help if possible, Marcus grabbed a handheld flare gun mounted near the cabin's doorframe. Together, we ascended the lookout tower's narrow metal staircase, the wind gusting stronger as we climbed higher. Reaching the top platform, Marcus immediately moved toward a larger, solar-powered radio system installed at one corner. He quickly began checking connections, adjusting dials, attempting various emergency frequencies. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, its peaceful green canopy broken occasionally by columns of distant smoke rising from towns and highways. The vista should have been breathtaking, but was instead haunting, revealing only the depth and scale of the outbreak. After several frustrating attempts, Marcus finally tuned into a faint transmission. The voice was distant and strained, clearly exhausted but coherent enough to understand. "This is emergency broadcast from Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania National Guard Base. We are compromised but operational. Survivors advised to proceed immediately to secure location. Repeat, proceed immediately. Evacuation helicopters departing daily at 1600 hours from main helipad. Expect heavy infected presence in surrounding areas." Marcus glanced urgently at his watch, calculating quickly. "If we move immediately, we might reach the base before the evacuation leaves today. It's a long shot, but probably our best chance." The urgency was clear. The broadcast indicated a narrow window of opportunity, and time was already against us. We swiftly descended the tower, quickly restocking supplies from the cabin before setting off down another trail marked on the map, leading east toward Fort Indiantown Gap. Our pace increased, urgency pushing us onward. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion weighed heavily, but adrenaline and hope propelled us forward. We exited the forest onto rural roads littered with abandoned cars, scattered luggage, and occasional infected shuffling aimlessly. We moved quickly, avoiding them whenever possible, only engaging directly when unavoidable. Each encounter drained precious energy, but Marcus wielded the fire axe efficiently, and my flashlight had become a reliable blunt weapon in tight situations. As daylight began fading, the distant roar of helicopter engines suddenly filled the sky. Ahead, visible against the darkening horizon, we could finally see Fort Indiantown Gap, partially illuminated by emergency lights and flares. Military helicopters circled above, preparing to land, their blades whipping dust and smoke into chaotic swirls. Relief surged momentarily, tempered immediately by reality. We were close, but still had a long final stretch ahead through dangerous territory. We pushed forward with renewed urgency, knowing our survival hinged entirely on reaching the base in time. The chaos and destruction surrounding us intensified the closer we got. Infected were everywhere, drawn toward the base by the noise and activity. Marcus urged us on, determination etched deeply into his expression, guiding us steadily through an increasingly hostile landscape. Fort Indiantown Gap lay just ahead, tantalizingly close yet still desperately out of reach. The final stretch would be the most dangerous, but hesitation was not an option. Marcus and I exchanged a quick look, silently reaffirming our resolve, then sprinted toward the base perimeter, racing against time, and against the relentless tide of infected surrounding our last possible hope for survival. The noise intensified with each step closer to Fort Indiantown Gap. The helicopters, their blades slicing loudly through the smoky evening air, hovered over the base, landing briefly to load survivors and quickly lifting off again. Marcus and I moved fast, our pace barely slowing as we navigated abandoned cars and clusters of infected stumbling through the fading daylight. Adrenaline had long since overtaken fatigue. Every instinct drove us toward that singular goal, reaching the evacuation point before it was too late. The road leading to the base entrance was jammed, littered with vehicles hastily abandoned. Suitcases, clothing, and personal belongings lay scattered, remnants of panicked evacuations and failed escape attempts. Many vehicles still had doors wide open, keys left dangling in ignitions, batteries drained. Small fires burned sporadically along the roadside, their flames flickering, illuminating the grim path ahead. We sprinted between vehicles, pausing only briefly to avoid larger groups of infected, conserving strength as best we could. Closer to the gates, the situation deteriorated sharply. The base perimeter fence had already been breached in multiple locations, its chain-link sections torn or knocked flat by fleeing vehicles. Military personnel in full tactical gear stood atop armored vehicles near the main gate, firing carefully aimed shots to slow the advancing infected. Their gunfire echoed repeatedly, each shot resonating through the chaotic scene. The sight of armed soldiers brought hope, but also chilling clarity. This was humanity's final stand, and we were barely holding the line. Marcus sprinted ahead, shouting and waving to catch the soldiers' attention. A nearby soldier swung his rifle toward us briefly, assessing quickly that we weren't infected, and motioned urgently toward the open gate. "Move faster!" he shouted above the chaos, his voice strained from exhaustion and tension. Marcus surged forward, and I followed closely, lungs burning with exertion. Just beyond the gates lay a wide-open helipad illuminated by bright floodlights. A large Chinook helicopter sat idling, blades spinning, its ramp lowered, as desperate survivors rushed aboard. We reached the gate as the soldiers hastily waved us inside. Immediately behind us, gunfire erupted sharply again, the soldiers firing rapidly into another wave of infected rushing toward the perimeter. Marcus and I moved swiftly onto the open tarmac toward the helicopter, joining others racing desperately to escape. The deafening roar of the Chinook's turbines drowned out everything else. Soldiers hurriedly motioned survivors up the ramp, yelling orders and scanning the growing horde behind us. Marcus was first aboard, turning quickly to reach back, helping me onto the metal ramp. As we entered, more survivors scrambled aboard, their faces grimy, eyes wide with terror and exhaustion. Inside, survivors huddled tightly together, clutching small bundles of belongings or holding on to loved ones, their faces tense and pale beneath the helicopter's harsh interior lighting. Marcus and I moved further into the craft, taking positions near a side bulkhead, making room as additional survivors climbed in hurriedly. The soldiers shouted at one another, communicating quickly over the roar of engines. Outside, infected poured relentlessly through the breached fences, overwhelming the soldiers' defensive positions. Finally, one soldier climbed aboard, turning to signal the pilot urgently. "Lift off now," he shouted, slamming his fist against the bulkhead. The ramp quickly lifted, sealing us inside as the helicopter vibrated heavily, engines whining under sudden strain. We felt the sensation of upward movement, slow at first, gaining rapidly. The floor beneath us tilted sharply as the Chinook banked, ascending away from the chaotic scene below. Through narrow side windows, we glimpsed the base perimeter being completely overwhelmed, soldiers retreating desperately towards secondary defensive positions. As we climbed higher, Fort Indiantown Gap shrank rapidly beneath us, revealing the extent of devastation in every direction. Fires dotted the landscape, burning unchecked across towns and rural areas. Highways appeared clogged with abandoned vehicles, stretching endlessly away from urban centers. Entire towns appeared dark and lifeless, overtaken completely by the spreading infection. The scope of the disaster was staggering, sobering, and terrifyingly clear. Raven Rock had been only the beginning, now it appeared nowhere was safe. The helicopter's interior grew quiet as survivors settled, staring out windows or into empty space, processing their narrow escape. Marcus leaned back heavily, breathing deeply, eyes closed briefly in relief. When he opened them again, he met my gaze solemnly. "We made it," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the helicopter's noise. "But it's clear this is far from over. Whatever this thing is, it's everywhere now." I nodded slowly, unable to reply, staring blankly at the chaos outside. The pilot's voice crackled through internal speakers, calm and steady despite the devastation below. "Attention all personnel. We are heading north to secure staging areas in upstate New York. Remain calm. Medical teams will meet us upon arrival. Stay seated and hold tight." The announcement felt reassuring but hollow. Marcus understood as clearly as I did. There was no guarantee that upstate New York or anywhere else would remain secure for long. Our experiences had shown clearly how quickly security and stability could collapse under this infection's relentless spread. After an hour in flight, the helicopter finally began descending toward an airbase, illuminated brightly by emergency lighting and flares. Below, hundreds of other survivors clustered near temporary medical tents and makeshift shelters, all hastily erected along a secured perimeter. Military personnel moved busily about, maintaining order and assisting those in need. The landing was surprisingly smooth, and as the ramp lowered again, fresh, cool air swept inside, replacing the heavy tension that had filled the helicopter's interior. We stepped down quickly, following soldiers' directions toward medical teams. Marcus paused briefly, glancing back towards the helicopter, then upward into a sky that had grown clear and dark. Stars shone brightly, indifferent to the turmoil below. For a brief moment, the sight was oddly comforting, a tiny reminder that the world beyond our disaster remained unchanged. Medics quickly approached, guiding us into tents for examination and basic treatment. Doctors and nurses moved urgently among survivors, assessing injuries, offering blankets, food, and water. Marcus accepted a bottle of water gratefully, drinking deeply before turning back to me. "We have to stay alert," he said quietly. "Even here, nothing feels permanent or safe. Stay ready. Keep close." I nodded silently, knowing he was right. Raven Rock, Waynesboro, the forest. Every step had taught us harsh lessons about trust and security. Around us, survivors sat huddled quietly, eyes haunted by exhaustion and loss. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone carried scars, visible or otherwise. As dawn approached, we finally settled in a quiet corner of a large tent, blankets around our shoulders. Soldiers patrolled constantly outside, weapons ready, vigilant against any threat. But their presence offered only limited comfort. Marcus sat silently beside me, eyes closed but clearly awake, listening intently for any change in our fragile safety. I thought back to how quickly normal life had unraveled. Raven Rock Nuclear Facility, the heart of our supposed security, had fallen first, plunging everything else into chaos. Now here we sat, uncertain survivors among strangers, united only by shared trauma and fleeting hope. The sun rose slowly, painting faint colors across the horizon. Marcus opened his eyes, staring thoughtfully into the dawn. His expression was cautious but determined. "We survived," he said softly, almost as if reassuring himself as much as me. "Whatever happens next, we're alive now, and that's enough." He was right, at least for now. The world had changed irreversibly. Whatever future awaited, we faced it together, fully aware of the dangers that still surrounded us. Raven Rock had shown us the fragility of civilization. Fort Indiantown Gap reminded us that humanity could still fight back, even in the darkest times. But the truth remained clear. This was only the beginning. Our survival today was no guarantee for tomorrow. The world had become a place defined by uncertainty, by constant vigilance and careful trust. And as daylight slowly filled the tents and fields around us, Marcus and I sat quietly, determined not just to survive, but to be ready, alert, and prepared for whatever came next. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.